Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, is so famous that many of us can recite it, at least in part, by memory. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. It is an anthem of agency, a testimony to the power of the right choice, of independence, of being an intrepid explorer of the path less traveled. Or is it? Recently, I read an article that spun this poem on its head. David Orr, in an old piece that popped up recently on my social media feed, calls The Road Not Taken the most misread poem in America. Why? Well, we imagine one tourist-trampled path. Think Disney at prime season. And another undiscovered wilderness. There we are in the places that few dare tread. It's a bold choice on which all the rest of life hangs. But David Orr directs us to look at the often skipped middle of that poem, where a very different scenario clicks into clarity. Listen closely. Frost writes, "Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though, as for that passing there, had worn them really about the same." About the same. The end is a fake out. These 2 paths were equally plausible. Frost apparently called this poem his private jest. Author Catherine Robinson expands that the poem was written about Frost's close friend and fellow poet, Edward Thomas, who, when they were out walking together, was chronically indecisive about which road they ought to take. And she wrote, in retrospect, often lamented that they should have in fact taken the other. Frost dubbed Thomas a person who, whichever road he went, would be sorry that he didn't go on the other one. The poem was written as a tease. Lighten up! One path might be just as good as the other, or it might not. You won't know until you take it. It's not the fork in the road that makes all the difference. It's what you do on the road you choose. So, as soon as Frost completed the poem, he sent it to Thomas, who completely missed the joke. Purim, in just a few days, reminds us that often so too do we. We get anxious. We perseverate. We focus on all that is wrong, and there is so much wrong. When faced with the forks in the road, we can find ourselves, like Thomas, paralyzed at the perceived enormity of any given choice. And as Maya, you so beautifully spoke about this morning, worrying, frozen, which way should I go? Because that enormity can sometimes keep us from making any choice at all, benched on the sidelines of our own life. And at first, Purim seems to amplify that pressure. The whole story turns on one big choice. You got to be careful. You got to make it right. Will Esther step up before the king to save her people, or will she continue to hide? What Mordecai says to her is epic. Mi yodea im la'et kazot. Who knows if perhaps it is for precisely this moment that you are here. The whole world rests on you right now. This is a total first read of Frost. If she makes the right choice, oy, how do I know? What do I do? Where do I go? We, of course, know the end of the story, that she made the bold decision. She took the other path, and it has made all the difference throughout Jewish history. But what if there's another read of that line that could take some of that pressure off? Because after all, most of us in most of our lives are not Esther. And most of our decisions are not with those stakes, and sometimes those stakes can cause more anxiety than they're worth. What if Mordecai's point is precisely that Esther does not have just one big choice? She's already arrived. Perhaps for just this moment, you are here. Meaning, she's been on her path. It's not about making one big choice. It's about all the choices that lead to the next, entering the beauty pageant, saying yes to the king, opening the door to her uncle, choices which in and of themselves she could never have seen the consequences of. But in making them with integrity, at each step along the way, they brought her to a place where she could make a difference. Ultimately, it doesn't even all hang on that one choice, because let's be honest here, it wasn't much of a choice. Over here, there's coming out as a Jew and saving your people, and over there, death, destruction, and devastation. Let's see. To further back this up, just back up a little bit in that same sentence that we pull Mordecai's words from the text of the Megillah, and we find that the full read of what Mordecai says is actually on the contrary. If you keep silent, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. The rabbis read the word place in this verse, makom, as a veiled reference to God, meaning either you, Esther, can make a choice to go down the path that leads to the redemption of your people, or God will find another way. When I shared this read with a friend, she said, well, that's annoying. Then what was the point that she went through of all of that stress about the crucial choice that she had to make if in the end it didn't even matter that it was her? And I responded, no, it absolutely matters that it was her, but not for the reason you think. We talked a bit about all the ways that we can get stuck when we come to the big decision points in our life. Should we marry? And if so, when? Should it be now? Should we enroll our kids in this school or that school? Should we retire this year? Maybe next year? Maybe the year after? Should we step up and speak out on the social issues that matter to us in this day? And if so, when and how and in what way? The reread of Mordecai's charge is critical because it takes the pressure off The end result may not necessarily change. Whether Esther is involved or not involved may not be the thing, but rather there is an opportunity. Does she want to be part of the redemption, or will she stand to the side? And that's our choice every day, too. The world will likely go on spinning in its way. For most of us, on most days, what we do or don't do isn't going to change that epically. But in a broken world, we all have a choice, a chance to, like Esther, walk a path that enables us to be a part of lifting our lives and that of others towards more light. As the Megillah ends, LiYehudim haita ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar, more light, more joy, more blessing. Do we want to be a part of that? It's not the fork in the road that makes all the difference. It's what we do on the road that we choose. Will we be stressed and pressed, anxious and miserable, bringing the weight of the world with us in every step? Or will we free ourselves to carry that weight with Mordecai's faith, with Frost's faith, that often it's not the decisions we make about which road we will take, but what we will do when we get there. It turns out that Robert Frost's famous poem would never have been written if not for a choice that he himself never could have known the consequences of making. It was a choice that he made by a literal coin toss. According to biographer Matthew Hollis, back in 1912, Frost's literary career had stalled, and he wasn't sure whether or where to relocate. Should he go to London or to Vancouver? So, he reports, while his wife did the ironing, he had taken a nickel from his pocket and flipped it. It was heads, which meant London. And 2 weeks later, the entire family was steaming across the Atlantic. Edward Thomas, at the time, was working as a reviewer. And when an unknown Robert Frost's poetry crossed his desk, he was there. Thomas had lived his life as a literary critic and author of prose, not poetry. And he was pressured by the stakes he set for himself in every book and every review, constantly thinking and worrying. According to the Poetry Foundation, he felt his artistic potential was being destroyed under the strain of constant production. When Frost entered his life, he did not make one concrete choice that changed everything. Rather, Thomas allowed himself to add poetry, a mode of self-expression that over time liberated him and left his legacy for the world. As Hollis wrote, Thomas pulled his friend's work from obscurity into a clearing, from which the American would go on to sell 1 million poetry books in his lifetime. Frost, in turn, released the poet within Thomas. Perhaps Thomas really did get Frost's point after all. All of our decisions have the possibility of being momentous. That can paralyze us or inspire us to lift ourselves up. It's not the fork in the road that makes all the difference. It's what we do every day on the road we choose. Shabbat shalom.